Meghna, you can start.
All right, hi Nathan, thanks. Okay, hello everybody. Good evening to everybody present here. Thank you for joining us today on our webinar on the role of shadow teachers in inclusion. Thank you for taking off your time for the day. Ideally, I would like to record this meeting. In case you're having some difficulty, uh, please do let us know. I'll be the moderator for the day today. Our intention of organizing this webinar was to support parents during these challenging times, as we understand working online with children with disabilities is definitely not easy. And we would like to extend our support and help parents during these challenging times. Insighte, with its motto of inclusion, has been working in providing care and support to children in schools, homes, and online since 2016 by rendering shadow teachers, special educators, and behavior therapists to facilitate holistic growth and development. I would also like to take this opportunity to welcome and introduce our speakers for the day. We have with us Dr. Bindya, who is a highly revered child psychologist who is known for her child rights-based therapeutic approach and her work in inclusion. She has over 14 plus years of experience in working with special needs children and has done her PhD in school psychology from North Carolina University in USA and has a master's degree in special education from the same place. She's also trained in the evaluation and treatment of learning disabilities, ADHD, autism, and anxiety in children and adolescents, and has been a part of founding team of several centers and inclusion in schools and Bangalore. She has developed her own model in support teaching using the principles of teach and has also trained and supervised shadow teachers, therapists for the last few years. She uses a cognitive behavioral approach to treatment and has also been trained in ABA, and she's currently the only certified professional in India in collaborative and proactive solutions, which is an evidence-based approach which looks at working with children and adolescents with behavior difficulties. She's also the ex-member of the Karnataka Child Welfare Committee and is presently the director at All Inclusive Foundation and the head of programs at Insighte. We also have with us Ms. Priyanka Mahanta, who is a psychologist and holds a master's in science degree from psychology from Bangalore. She's also worked as a shadow teacher for children in an inclusive school and also is a behavior therapist with specialization in ABA at Insighte. Along with her, we also have Ms. Yasmin, who is a parent of a child who attends an inclusive school, and she holds a master's degree in educational science from the University of Cologne in Germany. Having had 12 years of experience with children and youth in child protection, social work, counseling, and therapeutic education, she is currently residing in India since about 10 years now and hopes to impart her learnings to make systems in India more empowering for these individuals. I would like to welcome you all and would like to extend my gratitude for taking your time to be with us here today. And let's hear our speakers talk more about their experience in shadow teaching and share their perspectives about the same. Um, Thanks and open to the discussion. Bindya ma'am, would you like to go ahead and probably acquaint our
Sure.
audience? Thank you.
Meghna, can you let me share screen? Okay.
Yeah, sure.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you, Meghna, for that warm welcome. And I'm really glad to be here and support Insighte in whatever way I can. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take some time and give you a brief introduction about what shadow teaching is, in case there are listeners who are not aware of what this program is. And I'll talk a little bit about what it is and how Insighte supports families with this model. And then, maybe at the end of the discussion, once all the speakers are done with their part, we can probably field some questions too. What is shadow teaching? So we know that we have a lot of children who have learning disabilities. We do come across a lot of children who have learning differences. They are not able to access education in the traditional format, which is what almost all schools in India provide. It's just like how schooling was when we went to school. Our generation went to school, or the generation before us went to school. So they still do the same format where you have a teacher and a class full of children, and who all are expected to do the same thing. The teacher would give a lecture and give out assignments and ask them to do things or copy from the board, and every child in the class is expected to do the same. Now we know that there are a lot of children who are having difficulty adjusting to that format or responding to that format in the way the teachers are expecting them to. And we're seeing a lot of children who are having these difficulties, um, probably due to a neurological difference, which may lead to some kind of a diagnosis. The most commonly seen diagnoses at our practice are we get children with learning disabilities, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, autism spectrum disorders, some children with sensory differences. So we get a wide range of children that we support. Now, what we do for these children is that these families want their children to go to a regular school and access education like every other child. And we understand that some of these children are not able to do that in the regular classroom setting independently. So we understand there is a need for a support person, and that is where a shadow teacher comes in. A shadow teacher basically goes to school with the child and spends the entire day in the classroom with the child, supports the child through whatever it is that the child is expected of in the classroom, be it taking care of his belongings, pulling out the book when the teacher asks him to, or maybe reminding the child to get up and wish the teacher when the teacher walks in. So for complying with all the rules and routines of the classroom. Um, they also support the child with any kind of academic challenges the child may have. Say, for example, the teacher is already in addition with regrouping, and the child is still at a level where the child is barely counting. So this shadow teacher can probably help the child bridge that gap between what is happening in the class and what the child can do. Shadow teachers also help the class teachers understand what are some of the difficulties that the child is going through right now, and maybe help the class teacher make some accommodations for the child in the classroom. Shadow teachers also support the child's social skills development, where the child is having difficulty socializing with peers, having appropriate social interactions with his or her friends in the classroom. So a shadow teacher supports in that as well. There, the shadow teacher works on the child's social difficulties and works on some of those social goals that the child needs to develop. At the same time, the shadow teacher also works with the other children in the classroom to sensitize them to the child's needs. So, there's a bridging that the shadow teacher engages in the classroom. With the families who are at home who send their children to the school.
Hi, ma'am. Sorry to interrupt. Ma'am, your voice feels like you're very far away. If you could be a little more.
Is it better now, Ramya?
Hi, it's better now. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am.
Right. Okay. So the third group that the shadow teacher supports is definitely the family, and we've seen that a lot of children who have some kind of learning differences or disabilities, they go to school and the parents don't really know what happens at school, because children are not able to come back and report and tell the parents what happened at school. So a shadow teacher kind of supports that as well, where the shadow teacher can update the parents on what's happening at school. So shadow teacher works as a liaison between the family and the school. In some ways, what the shadow teacher reports back from the school is helpful for the families to follow through at home. Similarly, when the family tells the shadow teacher that there are certain interventions that is happening at home or with the therapy centers that the child is attending, the shadow teacher can ensure that the same interventions are carried forth in the classroom setting also. So these are some of the services a shadow teacher would offer. Why is a shadow teacher relevant today? As we all know, we are moving towards more and more inclusive settings, and we want less of separate, segregated setting for children with learning differences. We want all our children to be going to common schools and and studying alongside with all the other with all their other peers. So when we look at that, and when we look at a model for inclusion, we always want an inclusive model where the child is accepted into the classroom as is, and the teachers and the school administration and the everybody, all the stakeholders at school are able to accommodate for the child so that the child with whatever learning differences the child has, the child can be able to adjust in the school environment. But given our circumstances today, we understand that the education system that we have right now, the format in which education is imparted in our schools right now, this is probably not a possibility anytime soon. So we understand that for a child to be in a regular classroom with their peers and to access education in a regular classroom, there is a need for a support person. And that is why a shadow teacher becomes relevant in today's times. Now I can tell you a little bit about how Insighte does the shadow teaching program. So in most cases, the shadow teachers at Insighte are hired by a family, not by the school. So the child goes to a school and the child needs a shadow teacher. The family approaches Insighte and we support them in identifying an appropriate teacher for the child. Once the teacher is hired by Insighte, we give an initial training to all our teachers, which is like an orientation training that all the teachers have to go through. And then once the teachers are placed with a child, then there is continuing education that happens, which is ongoing trainings, training once every 2 months, there's a new training that comes by. And most of these trainings are designed in such a way that the children that we are seeing at that point will be supported. So if we find that there are certain specific difficulties some of the children that we are supporting at that point are having, we make sure our trainings that are being provided will have that particular element in it. We also do a lot of ongoing supervision for our teachers. The supervision element is very important because despite how much ever training we give, once the teachers go there and once they start working with the child, there are so many hurdles or so many roadblocks or challenges that they realize that they're having while they start working with that particular child. So supervision is helpful in that way, where they come back and tell us, this is the particular area that I am facing difficulties with, please help me. And there is a supervisor who supports them, and also their peer group. All the other teachers are also part of the supervision, and there's an element of individual and group supervision happening there. So this kind of support is another important element that a shadow teacher at Insighte receives. Now, when we look at advantages of this model, as I said, we know that a child, when the child is in the classroom, we know there are a lot of children who have learning differences but are extremely smart and can access the curriculum that is being provided in the school right now. But just because they have some behavioral difficulties, or just because they have some emotional regulation difficulties, or just because they have some learning differences in certain areas, they are not able to do it independently in a classroom. So a shadow teacher, by being there supporting the child, this becomes easier for the child, and we are helping one child access education in a regular setting. So, and as I said earlier, the interaction between the school and home becomes a lot more easier with the shadow teacher acting as a liaison. So all these are some of the advantages of shadow teaching. Now, what are some of the limitations? Now, as I had pointed out earlier, when we talk about true inclusion, we are talking about a child being included in the classroom independently, and the teacher who is in the class supporting the child in a way that the child needs to be supported. That is that is the ideal situation of inclusion that we are looking for. But we know that we are nowhere close to that, and this is probably the only way that we can do it, because from our perspective, a shadow teaching is also a kind of exclusion, because you have one child with a support teacher in the classroom, and every other child is looking at why is this child having an adult walking around with the child all the time. So that itself can become a reason for exclusion. So there is an element of shadow teaching that is probably not so inclusive. And that is one of the limitations of shadow teaching. But as I said, right now, this is the best option we have to promote inclusion, and hence we go forward with the shadow teaching model. There are certain questions that we get very often from families who come to ask us about shadow teaching. I'll try and answer a few of them, and then maybe you can I can answer more questions later on towards the end. A shadow teacher cannot be certified in just one sitting or one session of training. We've realized that because no matter how much we train our shadow teachers, once they are out there, once they start working with the children, the kind of challenges that they're going to face, that particular child, they will need support. So ongoing supervision is extremely important for a shadow teacher, and also to keep them updated with the with the newest research, or the latest research, and the latest technologies that are out there to support the child. So an ongoing training is required for a shadow. I've already described some of the roles and responsibilities that they engage in. How can they support children with online classes? Now that most of our children are attending their classes from home, we do have a lot of our shadow teachers who are going to their homes and supporting them during the online classes. We see that a lot of children are not enjoying or not able to engage with the classes just because it is not physical, just because it is online. A lot of them are not able to sustain their focus throughout the class. So our shadow teachers, they use evidence-based strategies to ensure that the child, sits there and stays through the class and is engaged and actively participating in the class. So we continue to support some of our children through the shadow teaching program, even when the classes are happening online. So these are some of the questions that we typically get. And as I said, I can answer more questions at the end of the session. That's all I have. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Vinaya ma'am, for sharing your perspectives and your experiences from the journey itself. Priyanka, can we hear a little bit from you in what actually happened in the setting? What do you do in a school setting when you're in shadowing?
Hello everyone. So I'll be sharing about my experience being a shadow teacher in the school. So shadow teaching, like this profession, was very new to me because I was working in a clinical setting before, and when I have joined Insight, and this opportunity came, it was very different. So when Insight assigned me with the client and the parents, so we had a formal meeting where I met them, and then we have decided to have at least 2 weeks of observation, so that I can understand the child more about his behavior, about his diagnosis, assessment, everything. So it will help once the school starts. So that is what we did initially, like for rapport building. So next, in the schools, the school is like, it's very different, and the child was So for the child I was working with, he was going to the primary school, and for him that the mainstream school was very different, and it was quite challenging for him to adjust in the school. So for example, in the classroom where there are about 20 kids, and there's there are two teacher, one my client, and I was there. So so it was it's a lot of students, and my client, he was very feeling very like insecure about the environment, because there are a lot of people. So to make him adjust in the class, then the teacher, they used to give the instruction as a whole, though they are aware that there's a special child, but still they will put the instruction as a whole, like take out your book, turn to page number 2. Now being a like for my client, it's a lot of instruction that is going on. So me being there, I have to divide all the instruction into parts, and I have to wait for his action. Like again, take out your book, I have to wait till he opens the book, then I can follow with the next instruction. So that is how it goes in the class. And also this kid, they have a huge problem with the social skills. So whenever we get time in the classroom or outside the classroom, we make sure they like he interacts with maximum people, like with his friend or the helpers, the other teacher. So I just make some goals where he can some basic social skill, like saying hi or giving high five, maintaining eye contact. So these are the very small goals I have taken initially to work on his social skill. And as the months pass by or the years, so we keep on adding the goals for him. So so also the social skill I have worked as, like how he can wait for his turn, or how to ask for a help. So these are the things they as a child, it's very difficult for them to initiate. So being a shadow teacher, you have to teach them how to go about and how to make friends. So so that's how I used to work. Now being a shadow teacher, it's not only I have to work with the child. So there are many things you have to take care of, like right from the classmate, teachers, then the school campus and parents. So for the first point, with the classmate, as ma'am has already, Dr. Vindhya ma'am has already highlighted the point, like the children, they are very curious to know why I was there with the child. So they keep on asking why you were there, or they keep on thinking me as the child's sister or mother, something like that. So so for me, I thought ki it's better to clarify with them why I am there. And also in return, they are very supportive. If so they have helped me to make my client comfortable with them. And also we used to play during our break time, so in that order we all have become a very good friends, and there's a great bonding. And because of that, my even my client is very comfortable in in making friend, or just holding hands. So those are the things which was troubling my client. So now once I am I have made the relationship with the other classmate, with his junior or senior, it's easy for my client to adapt that relationship. Now coming back to the second point, with the teacher. Now I know, with my observation, I know how the child will behave, or how his mood is about. So and what are the things he needs special attention. So so being there as a shadow teacher, I have to help the teacher to inform how the child is about, what are the areas they can help him, or how the child will be more comfortable, or he will be more responsible. So so there is a bridge I have to build with the teacher, so that they can help the child in return. And third point is, so in the school they have a special class, it's called in the SEN department, where a special educator will take one-to-one session with the child. So in that class is the special class, and I think that class is very helpful for the child, because in the main classroom it's very big and there are a lot of things which was it distract the child. But in the same class it's a very small room with one-to-one class with the special educator, and that time I know the child is very comfortable, and so I can wait outside the class. But in the main classroom it's difficult if I sit outside the class, so I have to be inside the class and help the child with his material or with the assignment that teachers give. So in the SEN class they get special attention, and also the teachers, they understand, since they are also from the psychology background and the special educator, they know what are the needs, how to deal the child. Then again, with the campus, so since all the classes are in the different room, like for the swimming he have to go to the other campus, other block. Again, for the lunch area there's another block. So so it is my responsibility to take the child in all the section, all the class whichever he have. And so it's my responsibility to make sure he goes to the class or he have his lunch on time. And the fifth point is to maintain a good relationship with the parents. It's because for me I believe if you have a very good relation, a good strong bond with the child's parents, you will get a in details report of the child. Because if is you'll be there throughout, so I'll be there with the child throughout the day. So for me it's important to know how the child, how his mood is there any sleep problem the previous night, or everything, what he has eaten. So everything I have to take the detail. So having a good relationship with the client, they will give you a in detail thing, in detail information about the child. Now before going to the school, I make sure like I'll have a 5 minutes conversation with my client to know about the child's mood and behavior. So throughout the day in the school, I'll be aware if his mood is not good. I'll be aware that I'll not force him to do something. Like if he's not in a mood, let's for that day we can at least play outside or do something else which he likes. So he will also feel comfortable in the school environment. And also, like throughout the day, whatever it happens or information I have to pass, I make sure I'll have a call with my client to to tell about the day, what are the things they have to take care of, or what are the good thing he have done it. So it's just kind of motivation for the family also, like they will get a sense of satisfaction if the child does something good. And also if they have to take the points where they can help the child if he is struggling with, they can also help the child after class. So these are the five thing that is you have to build the relationship. Like the child is important, but also you will have a good relationship with the child, but also it's important to have a good relation with the environment the child is going. Okay. And so uh, lastly it's like shadow teacher, if I see from my child's perspective, it's do help them in in building confidence, making more independent, because our job is to make the child as much independent as much possible. Okay, in all the areas we have to make sure like the child is independent, and they can take care of themselves, because we are not there throughout his school years. So so our job is to make the child as independent as possible. And also since the child, this type of children, they have problem with social skill, we do have to break the ice, so that the child is more comfortable with his friend, with his teacher, and he that the also he feels comfortable in the school environment. And so this is a brief about my experience. And if you see a limitation, since you are working in a school, and you have to follow all the school rules. Sometimes what happen if the child is not in a mood, still you have to you have to uh, like if the child is not in a good mood and he throws tantrums, so you will be the responsible to take care of that behavior. So sometimes it's very problematic. But again, I feel like in my experience the teachers are very good, all are supportive, and it was good working in a school setting with the child. And again, if something good happen, then they will give you the credit no matter what. So you will be also responsible for that if the child is doing good. In the parents teacher meeting, there will be a good, they also do the review for the shadow teacher. So there is a good thing being in like working in a school. Okay, so that's all I have as an experience for working as a shadow teacher in a school.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Priyanka. That was pretty comprehensive. Thanks for sharing. Yasmin, we would love to hear from you and your experience as a parent on how has it been working with shadows and for your child in specific.
Sure, sure. Hi, everyone. This is Yasmin. As you saw the poster, I'm from Germany and I've been living in India for about 10 years now. I got involved with shadow teaching actually before I came to India because I've worked in social work settings, in child protection for over 12 years in countries like UK, Germany itself, US, and Africa. So as you can imagine, I came into India with a certain expectation in mind when it comes to special education, inclusion, because in Germany it's very institutionalized. Shadow teachers are provided by the city council within the welfare office or youth welfare office. And it is very structured. And once the dice is rolling, people know what to do. People know which way to go. And after the application is done, the shadow teachers are well trained and they come into picture, helping the children in school. And the school is very, very active in the planning of the intervention of the shadow teacher. Of course, in the certain, the recent times with the whole migration happening in Europe, this has changed a little bit because there's a huge shortage on social workers and special educators, and there's a huge waiting list for those, so children are not always getting them. So just to give you a very brief picture of what kind of expectation I came here. And once we realized that my son has a certain condition, it was a huge odyssey for us, because until we actually figured out what it is, it took years. And because if you have a condition which is on a milder form, it's more subtle, it's really, really difficult to detect it, to diagnose it. So I saw the difficulty, even having worked with autistic children myself, or children on the autism disorder, autism spectrum, as they say nowadays, and children with ADHD, Down syndrome, all sorts of disorders. I did not detect it in him. We thought it's mischief, just not behaving well, like all of us sometimes think. But we as parents, and this is why I'm happy I'm talking here as a parent, we need to be really, really alert to our children sometimes, and be open to the idea that there could be an underlying condition. There could be something that needs intervention. And you as a parent, you really, really need to get your signals up in trying to figure it out and get help and an assessment done as early as possible, because we know from the scientific field that early intervention is the best cure in any kind of disorder, any kind of condition. The later you start, the more difficult it becomes to eradicate. You cannot eradicate some conditions, but you can bring it into a milder form, a much more manageable form. And it is really, really important as a parent to be open, first of all, to this idea. Because here in India, not only here in India, actually I've seen it in all the countries that I've worked in, there is a stigma on these children who are different, behaving in a certain way which is not fitting the expectation of school, of teachers, of parents. Some parents even have a stigma on those children and seeing them as a disturbance sometimes. So inclusion, if inclusion is to be successful in a school setting, everybody, each stakeholder has to be open-minded, very empathetic to the idea, and very understanding. Well, in a school setting, of course, it is not always easy because teachers are not always fully trained in understanding these conditions, and also, strictly speaking, don't have the time to deal with these conditions or give the individual support and attention to those children. Imagine you have 20, 25 children to teach in one block of 45 minutes. Whom are you going to give the attention to? So that's why I'm a huge advocate of shadow teachers. I know it's for an inclusive school, it's not ideal to always ask for shadow teachers, because an inclusive school should have its own interventions in place, the tools ready, the knowledge pool is there. But as we know, in India and many other countries, including Germany, nowadays, we have gaps, and the shadow teachers are filling those gaps. And that is good. When my son was diagnosed, he was diagnosed with a mild form of ADD, attention deficit disorder. We had no idea. It was such a blessing to find that out, because that's when we could put the interventions in place and start, working towards the goal of, giving him the support that he needed, which was not given before. But until we got to the diagnosis, it took years, and there were a lot of misdiagnoses done, and some assessments have, did find out nothing about him. They were just saying, he's just mischievous, and that's about it. And also, what I want to point out about the school structure in India, you do have a lot of alternative schools here, which are really, really good. I have seen quite a lot of them. And my son did go to one of them for a year. They were really good. But if your child is, I don't know how to describe my son, but he's quite an academic child, actually. He likes academics and he likes learning. He came home and said, Mom, I'm in summer camp or something. This is how he felt. And he didn't feel like he's going to school and learning, the subjects that he was supposed to learn and all of those things. So alternative schools are a really, really good, as the name says, alternative. But if your child is having a condition which is on a milder form and is very well capable of performing academically and has an idea of, going into university later, I would suggest that you do go to a mainstream school which has an inclusive setting. And a lot of children don't need shadow teaching, but if needed, be open to it. Be really, really open to it, because it helps tremendously. For me, when I was starting to look for shadow teachers, it was difficult because I had no idea that there were organizations like Insighte who were providing trained professional shadow teachers. And shadow teachers, you need to be really careful with what kind of knowledge base they're coming. And for my son in the beginning, with the first shadow teacher, it didn't go well at all, because some shadow teachers are not coming from the field of psychology or sociology or education, and they are trained in shadow teaching, in workshops or courses, and they go to work with a certain mindset that's not really fitting the setting. So as a shadow teacher, if you start feeling like the nanny of the child, you're not supposed to be the nanny of the child. And if you're starting to feel like you are replacing the teacher or the teacher's responsibilities, it's not the right way to go, because you're not there as a shadow teacher to replace the teacher or to become a substitute teacher. Your role is to assist the child in reaching independence and reaching the skills that he or she needs to become an independent student in school, because you're not going to be there forever. The ideal plan would be to be there maybe for a year or two, if it's really needed to go that far. I know the younger the children are, the more of the intervention or longer intervention might be needed, depending on the disorder. Especially like if you're on the autistic spectrum, sometimes in communication skills, it may take a long time to get there where you want to be. And also, it is very important to look at the age of the child. If the child, as I said, is diagnosed with a certain condition at a later age, and the shadow teacher gets involved, because as the age progresses, the stigma in the peer groups increases, the peer group pressure increases, and it is really, really important to look at the healthy socialization in school, that the shadow teaching is not hindering that. And if you have a child, like in my case, who luckily is on the milder form, who has reached a stage now where he will not need the shadow teaching anymore, but that also goes to the huge thanks to the shadow teacher who was involved with him, because that also helped a lot in getting him there where he is right now. So depending on the disorder and on the how severe it is, I would suggest that shadow teaching should not go beyond a certain age, especially when the child has reached a teenage, where the peer group pressure and everything starts. But if you have a school where the inclusion philosophy is rooted deeply, everybody is on board, the teachers are well trained, the parents are not stigmatizing, the students are prepared for a school environment where there is equal opportunity for everybody to receive equal education, then of course it can go further. But as we know, in the reality, that's an ideal picture, but it's not there. It's simply not there. So when also from the parents' perspective, it's really, really important that you stay involved in the shadow teacher's work, that you don't remove yourself from that role, because the shadow teacher is there to help your child. She is there to enhance the skills, help with the management skills, social skills, reach social competency, independence. But you know your child best. And the shadow teachers should always openly communicate to the parent everything, that has happened at school and how the child reacted. So the parent becomes almost like a mentor to the shadow teacher as well. Besides the supervision of the coordinator from the organization, is very, very important to mentor the shadow teacher as the parent as well. So you need to be ready to also hear the things that you're going to hear from school and the shadow teachers, you like it or not. And but be very careful in your approach with teachers, because I know that from my experience, a lot of teachers are really, really helpful, really open. But in some cases, I have seen that some of the responsibilities were put onto the shoulder of the shadow teacher, which I feel, if you want a teamwork done, it has to go hand in hand. And the shadow teacher can become a really, really huge driving force in even educating the teacher in certain techniques of how to deal with the child, because they need to understand that you as a shadow teacher are not going to be there forever. So the ultimate goal is to reach a point where the child can be a student like everybody else in the school, be a part of class, be a part of school environment, without being pointed at, without being discriminated, without being stigmatized. That's the ultimate goal, I think, for everybody. And I can only vouch for Insighte of having shadow teachers who are really, from my experience, if you compare with what's out there, really well trained, open to new perspectives and new learning, and really, really involved in the child's well-being, because that's another really important approach, that you need to be deeply interested in the child's well-being, because if you're not interested in the child's future and how he or she is going to live his life later, you need to really then work on your approach in that sense. You need to like working with children, obviously, and have the patience to do so. So in my experience, as long as schools are not playing active, or becoming more active in creating true inclusion in schools with interventions that are needed and the support needed, we need shadow teachers in those schools to make sure that the children receive the one-on-one support and the help and the guidance that they need to reach that ultimate goal that I was talking about. So I have written a lot here, but I think Dr. Binya and sorry, I forgot the name of the previous speaker, they covered quite a bit of what I already had written here. So yeah, I think from my side, that would be it, unless there are questions.
Yeah. Thank you, Yasmin. That was very elaborate, and it was indeed, I think it was great to know from what is it like to see from a parental perspective, because most often when we are working with children, like shadow teachers in school, you spend most considerable amount of time is spent in the school, and there's not much information that is known to the parent unless and until all of them work together as a team, and I think you rightly pointed that out, that it should be a teamwork. So thanks again. So now we're open to questions. So if any of y'all have any questions, you can unmute and raise it to the speaker. You can, if there is anything specific you would like to ask the speaker, you could do so. Or if you'd like any of the speakers to give you more clarity on anything, you can do that as well. Before that, I'll probably just raise a few questions which were asked on our YouTube live stream, which have been put out on the chat. So I think Vinky Sharma has put out that his son, their son is 8 years old and has become very hyperactive, and he's nonverbal and is on the autism spectrum. He does not want to do anything and he becomes stiff. What should I do? Vinky, if you're here, is there anybody who you would specifically address this question to, or can we have?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah.
Yes, ma'am. Ma'am, I am from Jalandhar, Punjab. My son is 8 years old. He is autistic. Ma'am, जैसे during lockdown, he has become so stiff and so aggressive that he doesn't want to do anything. Like he doesn't want to do study. He doesn't want to do any activity. I don't want, madam, I don't know, ma'am, what should I do? Even I have consulted so many OTs. I have done occupational therapy, so many things, but still he doesn't want to do anything, doesn't want to take interest in anything. What happened to him, ma'am? I didn't catch. Can you help me?
Dr. Bindya, would you like to take that question?
Is it better now?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Winky, it might be a little hard for us to answer your question in this forum because I would like to understand a little bit more about your son. What are some of the, what are some of his strengths? What are some of his difficulties? What are some of his interests? I would like to know a lot more about him before I can answer that question. Would you mind contacting us after the webinar? Maybe we
Okay,
can put
ma'am.
our contact
Send your
information here and you can
contact
reach out to
details.
us.
Okay, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, Winky. All right. I think we've had another question by Kumawat who said, is there any legal policy to recruit shadow teachers by school administration for special need children or any legal right for special parents, working mothers, especially or caregivers?
I'll try and answer that question, and Yasmin, please feel free to chip in, See, actually, according to the RTE Act and the RPWD Act, the Right to Education Act and the Rights of People with Disabilities Act in India, children with disabilities have to be educated in a regular school setting, and that is their right. Now, when you say they have to be educated in a regular school setting, it is the school's responsibility to take care of whatever it takes to educate that child. So, if you look at it that way, anything that is needed for the child to learn in that school setting is the school's responsibility. But that is not how it is, it is perceived, practiced, implemented. Most schools shy away from it. Most schools don't even think about children with disabilities as the disadvantaged group. Even if you look at the government schools, or even if you look at the children who come into the RTE quota in the private schools, this is not something that is considered. So now, for that reason, a lot of schools think that just by giving admission itself, they are doing a favor. That's how some of the schools treat the families. Now, I appreciate schools that are willing to give admission to the children, but then once they give admission, in some cases, the schools charge the same fee as they charge the regular children. But in other cases, they charge an additional fee for children with disabilities because they'll have access to the special education services as well. So for that reason, they're charged an additional fee. And besides doing that, the families are asked to get a shadow teacher. And that is not the school's responsibility. The family has to pay separately for that. I think it's extremely unfair that is being done because it is the school's responsibility to take care of that. So that is how, that is how much my limited knowledge about the legal framework to support shadow teachers would be to answer that question. I'm not sure about any legal rights for parents with special needs. It is basically whatever the rights the children have are what is available to the parents as well. And, they probably will have to ensure that those rights are being exercised for these children.
If I could add to that, Dr. Bindya.
Please, Yasmin.
Yes, I mean, India has signed the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities in 2007 itself, and the EU signed it in 2008. So there has, which guarantees a fundamental equal right for education without discrimination for anyone with disability. But everything looks nice on paper. Inclusion is written nicely on paper. The theories, they're but the reality looks very, very different. And in India, India is at this stage where maybe Germany was in 2008, maybe I could say, because after signing the treaty, Germany started taking it up very seriously. And like I said, in Germany, you do have rights as parents. You can approach the school ministry if there are issues. Now, how it works over here, I can only imagine. um, I don't know what would happen if your child was not, admitted to a certain school of your choice, but you saw it as your fundamental right, and for the child as well. I think someone should do some research on that, because I think it's going to become quite important even in this country. Because this act that was signed should be taken a lot more seriously than it is right now.
Yeah, thank you for answering that. Another question which is on the chat is Ramya Karthik has asked, can you please share about the reaction or response of other students in the class towards the shadow teachers? I think Priyanka did mention this, but if you could probably just elaborate a little more on that, Priyanka, it would be.
So the reaction of the children are like they want to know why I'm there, and they because all they are together, but only the client whom I'm shadowing, he's different. He's sitting with me in the class, so the reaction is a mixed reaction. But once when I have told them like why I am here and just to help my client, they have understood, and it's not like I'm only helping my client, I'm also helping them if they have not understood. And if the since there are 20 kids in a class, now if the teacher is busy for some with the other child, and if someone is sitting next to me, if they want any help, I used to help. So I'm working also with them if they need if they need my support. So again, when I told them about my motive in the class, they have understood and they are very accepting. It's not like they, but if so now they know why I'm there, and so that's it. So nothing much, but before that they were very curious to know. That's
Yasmin and Dr. Bindya, do you have anything that you would like to add to whatever Priyanka said?
I can only add of what my son told me, what was happening in school. Up to grade, I mean, he only got shadow teaching intervention in grade 5 when we moved back to, I mean, we were in Germany for a year in between. I forgot to mention that earlier. So we came back here when he finished 4th grade in Germany and joined 5th grade here. It was in 5th grade. It was really no problem at all. No child was really questioning why the shadow teacher was there with him, and they were quite open to that. It started in 6th grade, where, like I said earlier, the teenage hormones kick in and peer group and everything. Stigmatizing started happening, and that's where he came and said that, Mom, they are kind of bullying me, and they were kind of telling him, why are you not talking? Why is your shadow talking for you? So that's when the shadow teacher and I mean, I have asked her to approach the school to really educate the children in school about this, to raise awareness to them, to raise their empathy and their understanding. And I think in school, for it to be successful, the students who don't have shadow teachers need to be also, trained in that. So, but at the time, that's when the pandemic kicked in, and so, it just removed itself, the whole shadow teaching. So,
Thank you.
I think, as Priyanka pointed out, it is children understand. If you tell them the right way, if you give them accurate information, they understand. And in a lot of cases, we have seen that when we explain and tell them give them the right information about what is going on, they become allies. They also come around to support these children in the classroom. And for little children it's easier, like Yasmin pointed out. When children are older it becomes a little harder, and at that point we encourage children to become self advocates, like when they get to an age where they are in fourth, fifth grades or above, we want them to understand what they're going through and help their peers understand what they're going through. And I think self advocacy is also a skill that we need to teach our children, or we need to inculcate in our children who have differences, because then at some point the parent or the shadows or whoever it is supporting them will have to take a step back, and the children will have to be independent, and then self advocacy becomes a very valuable skill there too.
Thank you. Another question which is in the chat is, what is the baseline level of a child to cooperate with a shadow teacher? How do shadow teachers manage children with behavior or sensory issues?
We have not determined a baseline level. If the child gets admission into a school, we can arrange for a shadow to support them. That is how we have done it so far. We will just have to understand what the difficulties the child is going through. Sometimes a shadow might visit the child and get to know the child a little bit more, maybe in the home environment where the child is comfortable, before they start going to school. So there are some kind of prep work that the shadows do to support the children. So we've not discriminated against any child, saying this child is not ready for a shadow or anything like that. So any child who has acquired an admission to a school can be supported if they need that support.
Right. Is the mother eligible to be the shadow teacher herself? What are the criterias, and which school allows it in Whitefield from grade 1? That's a question that is asked.
I usually discourage the idea of a parent being a shadow. The first reason for that is, why do we send children to school? We send children to school so that they get used to an environment that is different from home. And that is our first step to creating independence in them. Right? So children eventually understand that home is different from school, and I need to behave a certain way in school as opposed to how I behave at home. So these are some some realizations that children have as they start going to school. And school is also a place where they need to learn to be independent from the supports that they get at home. So if a parent is the one who is following the child to the school, a lot of this becomes a little vague and confusing for the child. A second thing is, when a parent is there as a support teacher, things become a little confusing in a lot of sense. We see the class teachers, the school can become a little defensive about it, because there's no objectivity when a parent is the shadow there. Then I think it also kind of compromises the parents' level of advocacy also, or the shadow's level of advocacy for the child, because it's a parent who is working there and advocating for the child. So there's a lack of objectivity also that comes in. For these two reasons, I usually discourage a parent being a shadow for the child. And also, I think if it is a third person, it is always easier to make the child more independent in a lot of things that the child has to do at school. Yasmin, anything to add?
Yeah, having said that, I did that for a month and a half myself when I was not able to find a suitable shadow teacher at the time. Because I also wanted to, by doing that, and school did not really go against it because it was a lower grade. I think as long as it's primary school, they're a little more open to it, although not really ideal, because ideally, of course, it should be a shadow teacher. But if you are in a desperate situation and you're not finding someone, I offered myself, so for a very short time. which also gave me a huge insight into what was going on and what the real issue was for him and why certain things were happening, which was quite helpful actually for me as a mother. But you know, because for me and my son, it did not become detrimental at that age because I prepared him quite well for it, you know, explaining why I'm coming and for how long and for what reason. It worked out all right at the time. But beyond fourth grade, I also completely discourage parents or other relatives to do that. Even in research, this is also shown that it's very counterproductive to shadow yourself.
You.
And to answer the second part of the question, I don't know specifically which schools would agree to that. I think um, that is probably because we've not asked that question to some of the schools where we are sending our shadows. So I think when you're exploring schools, that is a question that you want to ask and get an answer from them. I think it might be a good idea for you to do that, because we don't know specifically which schools in Whitefield would allow. Because I've not seen anybody saying no to it, because as long as they have somebody to support the child in the class, I think most schools would be open, but you will have to ask.
Okay, I think there are a few more questions, but I think Sriram, you've raised your hand if you would like to ask anything, a follow-up question.
Actually, this is Sriram's parent here.
Okay.
I'm a teacher by profession, and I have a child who is 7 years old with autism and ADHD. He is a high functioning autism child on the mild spectrum. Uh, Even though he is functionally high, he does have learning disabilities like writing. He is facing dysgraphia. So in that case, how can a shadow teacher help him in completing his notes? Is one thing I would like to ask. The second thing is, it's not a question, it's more of a personal observation I have made. See, I've been teaching for so many years, but I still find that it is not like somebody had asked this question about how whether a mother can be a shadow teacher. I would say no, out of my own experience, because when you teach your child, you're having the parental or motherly instincts which are added onto it. So I would definitely recommend whoever are the parents listening to this that please do not give it a try. I've done it. And, maybe the 20 kids in a class might listen to me when I'm a teacher, but my own child may not do that. So I would certainly recommend putting a third party person as a shadow teacher and not do it myself. Even if I have the industry expertise, even if I have gone through special education courses, still I wouldn't recommend that. But coming back to my question, yeah, how do shadow teachers help a kid with dysgraphia?
I'm sorry, I don't think you mentioned your name.
My name is
mother.
Meera. I'm so sorry. My name
Meera, is it? Hi, Meera.
Yeah. Hi.
Meera, so we have our own philosophies when we come to working with children with difficulties. So when we go in as a shadow teacher also, not every time do we agree to do whatever it is that is expected of the child to do in the class. Because when we talk about a child having a learning difficulty or a learning difference, there is a genuine there's a genuine need there. And when your child is not able to take down the notes, there's a genuine need. The child is physically or neurologically not able to do that. And in those cases, we believe that we need to support the child. Because we feel like there may be a delay in the development of that skill, and until that skill is ready to come in, we might have to continue to support the child. So what we usually advocate for is you give them the opportunity and wait for the readiness. So you see that a child is having difficulty with writing, you give them a few chances to write every now and then. The child is still having difficulty, you support him with the writing part. And but don't stop giving him those opportunities. Keep giving him those opportunities, but if he's struggling, Don't force him to do that, but support him in doing it. So that is this is the philosophy we follow with all all the difficulties that the child tend to face, even if it's social, academic, communication, whatever it may be. So we don't necessarily push the child to do something that is really difficult for them to do. So if you're talking about somebody with a writing difficulty, we would explore a lot of options in that school. Say, for example, we've advocated for children who we have found that are really smart when it comes to orally delivering the answers, but cannot put it down on paper. So they'll when they practice at home, they do very well when for when they are studying for an exam. But when the exam results come, it doesn't really reflect in that. So that is because the child is having difficulty putting it on paper. So we usually ask the school, now if the child is having difficulty writing, why are you assessing the child using writing? Because if you are assessing to see how much knowledge the child has, use a method that the child is comfortable with and get that information. If you want to assess writing, you can assess writing separately. Even if he fails in writing, he's not failing in science. So we are trying to work around that situation where the child has a genuine difficulty, and how can the school be also able to support the child. There it is not just the shadow teacher helping the child to write, it is also about the shadow teacher advocating for the child and the child's difficulties and getting accommodations within the school for the child to function. Does that make sense, Meera?
Yeah, got that. Because most of the time, I think not only as a parent, but also as a teacher, I have found so many kids having dysgraphia in school, especially when I was dealing with the lower classes, the primary level. So they're not in a position to complete their notes on time, and there's a lot of complaint that comes with the late submission and all that. But in spite of schools being inclusive on paper, like Yasmin ma'am pointed out, when it comes to meeting deadlines, these kids definitely have trouble, especially when I stand for invigilation and they're supposed to finish their examination within a specified time. So those are situations where I wanted to know how a shadow teacher can complement the regular teacher. Yeah.
And that is definitely not inclusion then, as you pointed out,
Right.
because we have boards like CBSE and the open schooling board and all providing the accommodation for somebody writing a paper for a child in 10th grade.
The scribe system.
Yeah, so if that is there at that point, why are we pushing our children to struggle through the formative years or the years leading up to that, the 10th grade? If they can get somebody, if they are able to study and give the answer orally for the exam, then I think we should give them an opportunity to do that, because they are telling you that I know the answer, right? And we are trying to understand if you know the answer. But we have these traditional ways of looking at things. The notes should be complete, your assignments should be complete, your exam answers should be written a certain way, and there should be a certain amount of writing in your answers. These are all our traditional ways of looking at it, and not all children can do that.
Right. Okay.
So when we think about inclusive settings, we need to think about changing those expectations also.
Right. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you. Srividya, you raised your hand.
Yeah, hi, Srividya here. So can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, okay, good. So I have a question for Bindya and Priyanka, both of them. So this discussion, there was a point about, the goal being, the shadow teacher becomes redundant, correct? Like over time, the child does not need the shadow teacher. How do you actually go about trying to achieve that? Because we already talked about the point that inclusivity is not really properly implemented in schools, right? And it's very hard, even for a willing teacher, if the class strength is high, it could be really hard to look after a single child, give special attention to a single child. So there are various factors, not just the child, the school set up the environment that where the shadow teacher becomes important as a support system. How do you currently work towards making it redundant for a child. When you start working with a child, is that one of the goals you actually set, that eventually we will try to get the child to work on their own? And if you do, how do you actually go about doing it? Because that's one thing I am not able to understand. Because the last 1.5 years I have been sitting in with my child, right? He is really young now. He's in grade 1 this year. But I know from all this, I am shadowing him basically. And I know like the role I play. And I mean, not to belittle his teachers, not at all. They have been very kind, but I know I'm actually doing more for my child, especially in the online setup, than the teachers. And if I were not doing that path, it would have been really hard for everyone. And I can't imagine how you would go about making that piece redundant till the teachers and the entire environment is really up to mark on dealing with things like this, right? And that doesn't seem to be look like it's going to turn around anytime soon. That's my question.
So Srividya, to answer that question, briefly, we would say we do it on a case-by-case basis. And whenever we start working with a child, our goal is always to wean us out of the that child's life. But how soon or how often can we do that? Do we do that in all cases? We've not been able to do it. With some young children, they still continue to need us. But on the other hand, like for some children, like Yasmin's child, we have been able to do that also. Now, one thing that we do for sure is we draw the line at about 5th, 6th grade. We say that beyond that, if somebody asks for a shadow teacher, we are going to refuse, because that is not an age where the child has to, because there's a lot of peer pressure, there's a lot of adolescent issues that they have to deal with, and that is not an age where a child should be in school with a shadow to add on to his social social difficulties. But then what do we do? So now, as I said, we look at it as from on a case to case basis. So in a lot of cases, what we try to see is how ready is the environment to support the child, how ready is the child to survive in that environment without support. These are all information that we need to have before we make that decision. We've also thought about if like, say, for example, we have supported a child from, say, grade 1 to grade 4 or grade 5. At the end of grade 5, we sit down and try to figure out, now it's grade 6, and we probably don't think this child should be going to school with a shadow teacher. Now, then we need to think about, is this school the right setting for the child? Can we find another setting where the child would be able to do independently? Is this curriculum, or is the expectations that the school is putting on the child the right framework for the child? So there are a lot of things that we need to consider before we make that decision. So we might not be able to make that decision for a child who is, say, 6 or 7 years old right now, and we've started working with them, has a lot of communication difficulties, has a lot of social skills difficulties, is not able to do a lot of things independently in the class. So at that point, we might not even be able to say, what is it that our role is going to be for this child in the next year, let alone 3 or 4 years down the line. So we usually take it one step at a time. And, we, as I said, but we do draw the line at, when they get to their pre-teen or teen years, and we decide, because we've seen teenagers where we have had shadow teachers assigned to them, and it does not go well. So I think we need to respect that. We need to respect their age. We need to respect their autonomy. All that has to be respected when we make these decisions also. So I might not have an answer for your question, but we do it on a case by case basis by evaluating a lot of factors. Priyanka, you have anything to add?
Thank you.
I think you have already covered it. So yeah. So every children is different, and so does their need for the shadow teacher. So again, based on your child, you have to decide, and the school. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Going
you.
back
Thank you
to
so
the
much. I'm sorry. I just
yeah.
have one follow-up to that. I want to know like how accepting, this is again for Priyanka and India. I want to know how accepting is school management. Like shadow teachers, when they advocate for the children, they're asking for a lot of accommodations, right? And in terms of mainstream big schools, how have you, like specifically to Priyanka, how accommodating have they been so far? How have you found that relationship to work out?
So the school, they will be very welcoming because they need you, though they have taken the admission, but they want someone to be with the child. So for me, the school has helped me out in every way, whatever way I want their help. So because they want me to stay with this child, or anyone for that matter, they want someone to be there with the child. So they are very helpful, and yeah, so there's nothing like they will discriminate you. Yeah, there are some time where you will feel like, since you are not the part of the school as you are assigned from outside, but still with all this like in terms of the managing the child and all, they will help you out. So there's nothing like discrimination or anything.
And I think it also depends on the
Thank
school. I think Priyanka's school has been one of the better ones that we have worked with, and they've been very supportive of the shadows and their services. But we've had other schools which would refuse to let our shadows do whatever that the shadow think might be the right thing for the child. So we've had to do a lot of negotiation with them to maybe give the child a break, like a sensory break or something, where the shadow can take the child to another room and work with that child and all that. So there have been schools that have given us trouble also. So again, it depends on the school that we are talking about here.
Yeah, Bindu. Thank you. Yeah, I expect that will be so. It changes vastly, I guess, from school to school. Thank you.
Thank you. Going back to the chat, there's another question: at what test has to be done to find out your kid has a problem?
S- identifying and diagnosing a child is a completely different area. Right now, we are looking at how do we know if the child needs a shadow? Um, because there may be children who probably don't really fit a diagnosis, but they have difficulties in the classroom, functioning in the classroom, adjusting to the expectations of the classroom. Um, I think it is that, when a child is having difficulty adjusting in the classroom, as a parent, you will come to know about it. Your teachers will tell you that the child is having difficulty, and at the point where the teacher tries to tell you, or the school tries to tell you, that the class teacher is not able to manage the child in the classroom, or in most cases we have a lot of families who come to us when they are at the verge of the child is at the verge of being dismissed from the school. So those are the red flags. If you don't already see that your child may need a little bit more support in the classroom, these are some of the red flags where the teachers will let you know. There will be a lot of complaints from the school. The school will call and let you know. You may be called for a meeting about the child, and so I think that is one way of knowing. When the school tells you that there is a difficulty and we need support, that is one way of knowing if you need a shadow teacher or not. Now, for if your child is struggling with something, it could be academic learning, it could be regulating their behaviors and emotions at school, it could be with social skills difficulties. So if you continue to get these kinds of feedback from your teacher during the PTA meetings, it might be a good idea to evaluate or to talk to the teacher and find out if it is a common thing in the classroom, or is it something that you're seeing is significantly different from the rest of the class, and then probably approaching a professional, to try to find out what is going on with the child. If an assessment is needed, that would be a call a professional might take. There are also cases where schools might call you and tell you that, oh, your child is not doing well, we are not able to manage him, and you might have to go and get an assessment done and get a diagnosis for him. that can also be the way a school might call and tell you or inform you about things. But then what happens there is you can go and get an assessment done. But even after the assessment is done, and when you come back with the assessment results, what is the school going to do differently for your child? That is the more important question. It is not about the assessment. Because even after you get the assessment and you come back, the school will see the same child with the same set of difficulties, same set of challenges in the classroom. So, is the school equipped to work with that child and support that child given these difficulties? That is the more important question.
Can I add to that also, Dr. Bindia? I completely agree with that, because that's exactly what we did. And as I said, there was some misdiagnosis done, and at one point he was not diagnosed at all. Everything seemed to be fine. So for the parents, I would suggest to get 2-3 assessments done, not just one. Go to 2-3 therapists independently, and also to get an IEP, the individual education profile assessment done, because that will give you a good idea about the academic profile of the child, also in terms of IQ and all that. So we got all of these things done, but as you said, Dr. Binya, after everything was done and ready and presented, the question was, what now? So the important thing is, what does the school do with that? That's the more important question. And I think it will surprise everybody here that I suggested the shadow teacher, not school, initially, because I felt that he needs that in that moment to integrate in school and in class, because we had just returned from abroad. So you really, as a parent, have to be very vigilant, very active in finding your way through these things, and also be very, I don't know what the word would be here with school, but you need to be really, you need to play a very active role in school as a parent if you want the best outcome for your child.
Thank you, Yasmin. Okay, I think somebody's asked they need best inclusive schools at Chennai and contacts for extra curriculum activity like music, arts, sports for these kids. Anybody have any idea?
I don't think they'll be able to answer that.
If you can, again, reach out to us after the session, I would be able to, because I don't know of the names of those schools, right now to give them to you. But I have information from some families who have gone to, inclusive schools in Chennai, who I have been working with. So I may be able to give you some suggestions. Yeah, that's the best I can do.
Please reach out to us, Rajkumar, after the session is done. We'll try to support you.
Right, thanks for that. I have a question. Can I go ahead?
Yeah, okay, sure.
Great. Yeah, my name is Boaz, and myself and my wife are connected in the call now. And our son is 7 years old, and he's mild autistic. And what we found out is, I'm glad that we connected to this call. We heard all the discussions. But what's our thought is, we as parents, we are more focusing on the activities and more on the educational or institutional college or a degree or educational classes or schools. But for these kids, if we can specifically train them on the behavior more than the classes or the inclusive schools or any other classes, if we could have a behavior classes, because that will change them in the future. So is there anything related to a class related to the behavior change, a tips or an activity related to the behavior change, because that will help them to change their lifestyle, even though they might be autistic?
Boaz, again, like I had responded to the first parent who had raised a similar question, I'll need a lot more information about that in order for me to even start to help you. So I may not be able to answer that question right now. Would it be okay if we connect after the webinar maybe?
Yeah. Very well. We can do that. We can do that. And another question is just a short question is, do we have a special uh, training or a session in regards to sports or music for these kids especially? Do we have tutors for this or a shadow teacher for these? Not only again in the institutional side.
Right,
I'm
right.
also asking from a extracurriculum activity, a shadow teacher for this.
So we are advocates for inclusion in all areas. So it's not just for school, even for other activities, we encourage inclusion. So we say this, that when the child has a disability, everything is made into a therapy, and everything doesn't have to be made into a therapy. Music becomes music therapy. Horse riding becomes equestrian therapy. It doesn't have to be that. It can be that I've seen a lot of good teachers. It all depends on who is teaching that skill for the child. I've seen a lot of teachers who take classes for typically developing children, who understands the limitations that these children have and work around it and help them in that way. So there are a lot of teachers who do that. Teachers who work, teach art to children with disabilities, and they are not. They're not necessarily trained in special needs or have a psychology background or anything, but they just know how to work with children, and sometimes that is all that is needed. If you can find that one person who can support your child in those areas, I think that is all you need.
Yeah, but that's the problem in Chennai specifically.
It's very hard, is it?
We couldn't find anyone. So that's where we would require a help from a team like you, or how you can help us on getting these because we as parents want our child to also get the best in the society, because these children are especially highly talented. My son has never been to school, but he can speak. He can read 4 languages.
I'm sure.
So
See,
that's
one thing that we could do probably is now that we are all doing everything online, there are a lot of teachers who can support you remotely also. So if we know of teachers who are doing it, who we know are good with working with children with difficulties, probably in Bangalore, who would be willing to train your child online, we can even connect you to that. So maybe when we talk later, when we talk later,
we can.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Till what age does a child might need a shadow? I think that's another question asked by Kshitija. I think we kind of answered that with regard to. But is there any follow-up, Kshitija, that you would want to ask? If you're here.
You can probably take Karthik's question.
Right.
Do shadow teacher have a role when it comes to the test assessment which is conducted by school? Are they allowed to help the child in reading question paper and writing answers within the related time?
So I think it depends on each school how they do it, because not a lot of school, first of all, give that accommodation where the child can give their answers orally and the answers would be written down by a scribe. So in schools where they do that, we recommend that the class teacher or the subject teacher who is giving that exam sit with the child, orally ask the questions, write down the answer, and score the answer sheet that way. Now, when it comes to the child actually writing the exam in, say, for example, for a board in 10th grade or so, there are certain restrictions on who can write the exam. So they usually say it should be a child who's younger than the exam candidate who should be writing the exam for the candidate. So in those cases, we identify a child who's younger than the child who's taking the exam, and kind of help that child work with this child a little bit so that they get to know each other and they get to know the pace of the candidates responding to the answer and how soon this child can write and all that. And we usually have a child do that. That is how it is done in in the board exams. So with schools, I'm not sure if we've had any examples where one of our shadows had to do the assessments or tests. Priyanka, do you know of any where any of our colleagues have done that to support a child during assessments?
No, ma'am. So usually in my school, the school I'm working with, so they will judge the child based on the assignment, and also they will have a special exam by the SEN department, special educator department. So this is how they used to take the test. It's either, so whichever the child is comfortable, either orally or written. So based on the child's need, the capacity, they take the exam.
Right. And I think it's probably not a good idea for the shadow teacher to support the child in exams, because I'll tell you why. We've had one example where one of the child who we were supporting, and I think before the online classes started, things were going well because the teachers knew what the shadow was doing with the child, what the child's ability was, and all that. The teachers had a good idea. But once the classes moved online and the new academic year started, the new teachers who came in didn't really know the child. So all they see is a child who does not talk or who does not respond. But then when the assignments come in, the child's assignments are coming in on time. And in fact, the teachers did not say anything initially, but when I think in their first parent-teacher review or something, the teachers gave a poor review for the child. And when the parents questioned it, they said that, oh, the shadow teacher is doing it for the child. So how do we rate the child? So the parents had to actually, fight and advocate for the child there to convince them that the child is capable of doing it and the child has done it in previous years and it is not the shadow teacher's work. So I think it might be a good idea for the shadow teacher not to be engaged in that, because again, it's a credibility issue. They probably um, will not believe that the child is able to. So we need to convince the school that there are certain things the child is independently capable of doing, rather than the shadow supporting them in all the. So I think maybe a third person or another child who can support, or the subject teacher writing the exam for the child is what we would advocate for.
Ma'am, can you also talk about how the role of shadow teacher works when it's an online classroom, as in like right now?
I think we did mention that when I was presenting initially. So right now we've had some teachers who are supporting the children from homes, and a lot of teachers are come back and tell me that children are not able to cope up with whatever is happening in the class, or cope up with the pace at which things are being run in the class. So in a lot of cases, we see that children attend half of the online classes, and the other half, the shadow teacher works with the child on certain areas that the child is struggling in. So basically a one-on-one session with the child. So some of the shadow teachers feel like, that may be a better way of spending that child's time rather than the child being not engaged in an online classroom. So we try to balance it out where the child can be part of the online classroom in all the areas where the child is able to cope with that expectation there. And in the areas where the child is absolutely disengaged from the classroom, we have the shadow teacher work with the child on certain areas where the child is lagging behind. That is one thing we've been doing. The other thing is to, like, say, there are some children who may need, a little bit of help with maybe writing down the notes, or there may be some children who need a little bit of structure to follow what is happening in the class. Now, these are all the things that a shadow teacher is supporting them with. So many of our shadows are still going and supporting the children from their homes while they attend the online sessions, because the parents are engaged with their own, their own tasks and duties. So a shadow teacher being there is of great help to the family. Yeah, so Priyanka, if you have anything to add, maybe.
Okay, all right. I think Sahana has asked which was the school that Yasmin's son is studying in. He's studying in Indus International School in Bangalore. Okay. Praveena, I think you have certain questions. Is it okay if we can probably connect once the call is done? I think we would like to take more details because you had mentioned that your child is having some difficulties in recognition of alphabets and all that. Would that be okay if we can take it after the webinar is done? Okay. What is the criteria that you use for choosing shadow teachers? Yasmin, would you like to?
Oh gosh, that's a tough one. Well, for me, the utmost important thing is that the shadow teacher should be able to build a rapport with my child, a trusting rapport. And even in the process of interviewing, at first time talking to the shadow, I would look at trying to get a sense of the personality, because for me, an open personality, an open mindset is the most important. And for me personally, also humor is very important. It works well with my son, because if you crack a joke already, you have melted some ice. Then, of course, the knowledge base, techniques used. I would ask questions of like, what if this happens? If A happens, what would you do? What would you do? Also, professionally, what the shadow teacher would have studied. I think that also plays a little bit of a role for me, because having hired someone who doesn't come from a psychological and educational background, I think it does make a difference if the shadow teacher comes from the psychological educational background. The rest you will not be able to foresee until the shadow actually starts working with your child. So I would also suggest to, once you have a good feeling about it, to go ahead, and you can always change if it doesn't work out.
Thank you. Another question I think asked by Vani was, how do we do the weaning off process for shadows? And some schools probably who are good at weaning it off as well. You can, Vidya ma'am and Yasmin.
Yasmin, do you want to take that one? How do you wean off a shadow?
How do you wean off a shadow? Oh, okay. Oh, that requires a lot of good technique from the shadow. I don't know who, Dr. Binja, do you want to answer
that? I don't know if I have a specific answer to that. Again, going back to what we said earlier, there are a lot of factors that we need to look at first. If the child is ready to be in that particular school without a shadow, that's the first question we need to answer. And now, if we feel like it is possible, then we might even start working with the shadow, the previous academic year, maybe second half of the previous academic year, to put structures in place, so that sometimes a visual schedule, or a visual checklist, things like that can help a child stay on track and do whatever it is that a shadow is supporting the child in doing. So some of the strategies that we use, we will plan in such a way that it can be independently used by the child later. We might even try and see. I've had some of the shadows at Insighte who've done a very nice job of doing this. I've had shadows who would understand that this is a class where the child needs me a lot, but this is a class where the child can do away without me. In those classes where the child can do away without the shadow would sit in the back of the class, not even sit with the child. And from there, she observes how the child does. And if she finds it's going well, then she might even stop sitting with the child during that class. Unless there is like a problem that happened during that class, she would go and discuss with the child after the session, things like that. So there are a lot of different ways our shadows have done this before. We even look at, if say for example the shadow had to take the day off, how did the child perform in the class that day? So we might get that information from the class teachers to understand how is the child doing without the shadow. So these are some of the steps we might take to see how the child is able to adjust without a shadow, I think.
All right. We'll probably take another question or two and then we can wrap up. If there's anybody who would like to unmute and say anything, you can do so.
I just have a follow-up question regarding how shadow could help in the examinations. Throughout the year, the shadow teacher is assisting the child in the school premises, be it in writing or be it attending to the copywriting from the board, because sometimes the child gets lost in a thought, he would struck up and he may not write further, he would stood still for some time, so he would give a prompting, so he would continue further. When it comes to an exam room where a question paper is given, the child would be capable of answering all the questions, but he would require a prompt, or he may sit idle, he would seek some motivation for him to write further. So that doesn't happen with shadow teachers, right? They
So
won't
in,
be
in
able to
such
prompt.
cases, what we have seen usually happens is, if it is an inclusive school and they understand that the child has difficulties, the child is usually not tested in the same room as everybody else. So the child is probably taken to another room for testing. So there's a separate room for testing. The child is given additional time to do the test. And in most cases, the person who sits with the child to do the test would be the special educator, if the school has one, not necessarily the shadow. So the special educator who works closely with the child also knows the child's difficulties and, what are the areas where the child needs prompts and all that. So that way, there is no stigmatizing or there's no discrimination against the child, where the child is sitting in the same classroom as the regular kids and a shadow is sitting there and supporting the child in a lot of things, which, other kids might find unfair. So when there is a need that a child has to be tested differently, the schools, if it is an inclusive school again, will make room for that. So in that area, if the school is okay with it, a shadow, there is no harm in the shadow supporting the child to write the exam. That can be done, but there would usually be somebody else also proctoring it to make sure that it is the child who's giving the exam. I don't know if that answers your question, Karthik.
Yeah, thank you.
We can close it.
Thank you so much for everybody for being here today. I know it was Saturday and probably had other plans now that I think at least the lockdown has been lifted in Bangalore. But thank you so much for joining us, and I hope the session was informative. I can probably speak from Insighte side, but we have been supporting the children by traveling to their homes, and have been supporting them in their online classes as well. Now that schools have reopened, we've been supporting them online and have been working with their therapy services as well. So if you do need any support, you can always reach out to us. I think we've put our details in the chat. If you want to consult Dr. Bindya, you could definitely reach out to her as well. We will put out in the information there, so you can consult with her if there is more you want to explore more about your child, need to understand. Anyway, thank you so much, Yasmin, Dr. Bindya and Priyanka, for coming in today and sharing your perspectives and your journey, how shadow teaching has been, how different has it been for all the three of you. And thank you for all the participants for coming in and sharing your journeys as well. I think we'll be sharing a feedback form to you via mail. you could probably with the details as well. So you could probably give us your feedback there. Or if you have any feedback right now which you would like to share, you could do that as well.